I've lived in this apartment for almost 3 years now. It's not the best place, thin walls, flickering hallway lights, that faint smell of mildew that never really goes away, but it's cheap and mostly quiet. My neighbors keep to themselves, which I appreciate. Or at least, most of them do. About a month ago, I started noticing something weird. There's this guy on my floor, maybe mid-40s, average height, always wearing the same gray hoodie and sweatpants. I'd never really paid much attention to him before, but one night, coming home late, I saw him standing in the hallway. Just standing there. At first, I thought he might have been locked out or waiting for someone. He wasn't on his phone, wasn't knocking on any doors. Just standing perfectly still, facing down the hall. I walked past him, said a quick hey out of politeness. No response. He didn't even glance at me. Just kept staring straight ahead. A little weird, but whatever. I went into my apartment, locked the door, and forgot about it. But then a few nights later, I saw him again. Same spot. Same clothes. Same dead stare down the hall. It was around 1 a.m. I hesitated for a second, feeling this weird sense of unease creeping in, but I brushed it off. Some people are just strange, right? Maybe he had insomnia. Maybe he was waiting for someone who never showed up. I told myself it wasn't my business and went inside. But the thing is, it kept happening. At first, I only saw him once a week. Then, every few days. Then, almost every night. Always in the same spot, always motionless. I started to wonder if anyone else had noticed him, but no one ever said anything. I never saw other neighbors reacting to him. I even started listening at my door before stepping out, just to check if he was there. Sometimes he wasn't. Other times, I'd open the door and find him already standing there, staring down the hallway like some kind of statue. One night, I decided to test something. I left my apartment at around midnight and walked down the hall, pretending I had somewhere to go. He was there, as usual. As I passed him, I turned the corner but didn't leave the building. Instead, I waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. 15. Then slowly, I peeked back around the corner. He hadn't moved. Not an inch. That's when I started to feel really unsettled. Standing around for a few minutes was one thing, but for over 15? In complete silence? It wasn't normal. My brain kept trying to come up with explanations. Maybe he had some kind of condition. Maybe he was just extremely weird. But none of them really made sense. I went back inside and locked my door, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I told a friend about it the next day, but he just laughed it off. Dude, maybe he's high or something, he said. Or he's just a weirdo. Ignore him. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But that night, when I came home late again, he was there. This time, I noticed something different. His head was slightly tilted, like he was listening for something. Not looking. Not waiting. Listening. I started avoiding him. If I saw him in the hallway, I'd take the stairs instead of the elevator. If I heard any noise outside my apartment at night, I wouldn't check. I told myself it wasn't my problem. He wasn't hurting anyone, right? Just standing there. Just listening. But then a week later, things changed. It was a Friday night. I had stayed late at work, exhausted from a long week. By the time I got home, it was nearly 2 a.m. The hall was silent, the dim yellow lights buzzing faintly overhead. I turned the corner, already fishing my keys out of my pocket, and froze. The man wasn't at his usual spot. He was standing right in front of my apartment door. My stomach dropped. He wasn't looking down the hall anymore. He was facing my apartment. For the first time, I saw his face up close. Pale skin, dark circles under his eyes, lips slightly parted like he was breathing through his mouth. He didn't blink. He didn't move. Just stood there, inches away from my door, completely still. I stopped a few feet away, gripping my keys tight in my hand. Can I help you? My voice came out uncertain, quieter than I intended. He didn't react at first. Just stood there. Then slowly, he turned his head toward me and smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not even a creepy smile. Just empty. Then he said, in this quiet, almost amused voice, "I like to listen." A chill ran down my spine. Listen to what? I asked before I could stop myself. He didn't answer. Just kept smiling, his head tilting slightly, like he was listening right now. My fingers tightened around my keys. Every instinct in me screamed to get inside, to lock the door, to put as much distance between me and this guy as possible. I forced a nervous chuckle. All right, well, good night, man. I stepped past him, keeping my eyes on him as I slid the key into the lock. He didn't turn to watch me go in. He just kept facing the door, as if I wasn't even there. My hands were shaking as I shut the door behind me. I stood there for a few seconds, heart hammering in my chest. Then carefully, I put my ear against the door. Silence. No footsteps. No movement. He was still standing there. I didn't sleep that night. Every little creak in the building made me jump. I started wondering, how long had he been standing outside my door before I got home? Had he been there all night? Had he been listening to me inside my apartment? The next morning, I cracked my door open to check. He was gone. The hallway was empty, like nothing had happened. But as I stepped out, something caught my eye. Faint scuff marks on the floor, right outside my door, like someone had been shifting their weight back and forth for hours. I didn't know what to do. Call the cops. What would I even say? Hey, there's a guy who stands in my hallway at night and listens to things. It wasn't illegal to stand in a hallway. He wasn't doing anything. But deep down, I knew something was seriously wrong. That night, I shoved a chair under my doorknob before going to bed. I barely slept, every little sound setting me on edge. I told myself I was overreacting, that maybe he'd stop, that maybe I wouldn't see him again. I was wrong. I barely left my apartment that weekend. Every time I thought about stepping into the hallway, I got this sick feeling in my stomach. What if he was out there again? What if he was standing right outside my door? I kept trying to convince myself that I was overreacting, but deep down, I knew this wasn't normal. I started noticing little things that made me even more paranoid, like how I'd wake up in the middle of the night feeling like I had just heard something, but when I listened, there was only silence. Or how sometimes when I turned off my TV, I swore I could hear something faint through the wall. A soft, rhythmic sound, almost like breathing. By Monday, I was exhausted. Lack of sleep, stress, and this constant feeling of being watched had drained me completely. I decided I couldn't live like this. If I saw him again, I was going to confront him. No more ignoring it. No more pretending it wasn't happening. I left for work that morning, half expecting to find him outside my door again, but the hallway was empty. Still, I felt uneasy the entire day. Even at work, I kept checking over my shoulder, feeling like someone was watching me. That night, I forced myself to stay up, determined to listen for any sound outside my door. I turned off all my electronics, sat on my couch, and waited. For hours, there was nothing. Just the usual creaks of the old building, and the occasional sound of a neighbor moving around. By 3 a.m., I started to feel stupid. Maybe he had finally stopped. Maybe I'd worked myself up over nothing. But then, just as I was about to go to bed, I heard it. A soft knock. It wasn't loud. It wasn't urgent. Just a gentle, deliberate tap, tap, tap. My entire body tensed. I didn't move. I barely even breathed. I waited, listening, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Another knock. Slow. Rhythmic. Like whoever was on the other side wasn't in a hurry. Like they knew I was awake. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen. It felt like an eternity. Then finally, I forced myself to stand up, creeping toward the door as quietly as I could. I pressed my eye to the peephole. My blood ran cold. He was standing there. Not looking at the door, not knocking again. Just standing perfectly still, his head tilted slightly like he was listening. I backed away from the door, my hands shaking. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the cops, but then I hesitated. What would I even say? A guy knocked on my door? That wasn't a crime. And besides, I didn't want to make him angry. I didn't want to provoke him. So I just stood there, holding my breath, waiting for him to leave. Minutes passed. Maybe an hour. I don't even know. But eventually, when I finally worked up the courage to check the peephole again, he was gone. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined him standing outside my door listening. What was he listening for? My breathing? My movements? My thoughts raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. When the sun finally came up, I felt like a zombie. But something was different. For the first time in weeks, I stepped into the hallway, and it was completely empty. No sign of him. No weird tension in the air. Just normal. Days passed. Then a full week. Then 2. He was gone. I didn't see him in the hallway. I didn't hear any knocking. The weird breathing through the walls? Gone. It was like he had never existed. At first, I didn't trust it. I kept waiting for him to come back, but as time went on, I started to relax. I slept better. I stopped flinching at every little noise. Eventually, I convinced myself that maybe he had moved out. Maybe he had gotten bored. Whatever the reason, he was gone, and I could finally breathe again. Then last night, something happened. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard it. A sound so quiet that, at first, I thought I had imagined it. A soft, almost imperceptible noise. Breathing. Not mine. Not from my apartment. It was coming from the other side of the wall. Slow, steady, deliberate. My entire body went cold. I turned onto my side, staring at the wall, barely daring to breathe myself. It was so faint, but it was there. I wasn't imagining it. I squeezed my eyes shut, heart pounding. Maybe it was a neighbor. Maybe it was the pipes. Maybe it was nothing. But then I heard it. A whisper. I couldn't make out the words. It was too soft, too muffled. But I knew. I knew it was him. He hadn't left. He had just moved. He wasn't in the hallway anymore. He was in the apartment next to mine. Listening.